All stories posted on our channel are stories from our subscribers and created by us based on real events we've experienced and witnessed. We post new stories every day for your entertainment, that we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
The first time I felt the world slip sideways, I blamed it on exhaustion. I had been working 16-hour days for the past 3 weeks, finalizing the acquisition that would cement my company's position as the leading renewable energy firm on the West Coast. Dizziness seemed like a reasonable price to pay for success. My name is Weston Calloway. I was 47 years old, the founder and CEO of Callaway Energy Solutions, and until that Wednesday morning in early March, I had believed that the life I had built was everything I had worked for, the culmination of 3 decades of relentless ambition, calculated risks, and occasional luck. I was wrong about nearly everything. The vertigo hit me as I was pouring my morning coffee in the kitchen of our home in Bellevue, Washington, a sprawling lakefront estate that Simone had insisted we purchase 4 years shortly after our wedding. I grabbed the counter's edge, watching the room tilt at an angle that seemed physically impossible, and waited for the sensation to pass. "Weston, are you all right?" Simone appeared in the doorway, her silk robe catching the morning light in ways that reminded me why I had fallen so completely for her 5 years earlier. She was 34 now, still possessing the kind of beauty that made strangers pause on the street, still carrying herself with the effortless grace that had captivated me at that charity gala where we first met. "Just dizzy," I said, forcing a smile. "I haven't been sleeping well." "You work too hard." She crossed the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the marble floor, and pressed a hand against my forehead. "You don't feel warm. Maybe you should see Dr. Hannigan." "It's nothing, just fatigue. At least let me make your coffee. You sit." I allowed myself to be guided to the breakfast nook, where the view of Lake Washington sparkled in the spring sunshine. Simone returned moments later with my coffee, prepared exactly how I liked it, with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and set it before me with a concerned smile. "Drink. It'll help." I drank. The coffee tasted slightly off, a metallic undertone that I attributed to the new beans Simone had been ordering, but I finished the cup regardless. Within an hour, the dizziness had intensified, accompanied by a nausea that sent me to the bathroom twice before lunch. "Food poisoning, maybe," Simone suggested when I finally admitted I was too ill to go into the office. "You had that sushi yesterday." "Maybe. I'll cancel my appointments and stay home with you." "Don't be ridiculous, it's just a stomach bug. Go to your gallery. You have that showing to prepare for." Simone had opened an art gallery in downtown Seattle 2 years into our marriage, funded by what she called a small loan from my accounts that had somehow grown to nearly $2 million. I hadn't minded. Her happiness seemed worth the investment, and the gallery gave her purpose beyond the charity work that occupied most wealthy spouses. "If you're sure," she said, her reluctance seeming genuine. "I'll have Marta check on you." Marta was our housekeeper, a middle-aged woman from Guatemala who came 3 times a week to manage the domestic tasks that neither Simone nor I had time for. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to be alone, and retreated to our bedroom to sleep off whatever virus had claimed me. The sleep was fitful, interrupted by dreams I couldn't quite remember upon waking. Something about water, about drowning, about hands holding me beneath a surface I couldn't break through. When I finally woke in the late afternoon, the nausea had subsided, but had been replaced by a profound weakness, as if my muscles had forgotten how to function properly. I called Dr. Hannigan's office and scheduled an appointment for the following morning, telling myself it was merely a precaution. 47 wasn't old, but it wasn't young either, and successful men in my position had been felled by heart attacks and strokes before. Better to be careful. Simone returned home that evening with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, a thoughtfulness I appreciated even though the smell of food made my stomach turn. "Still not feeling well?" she asked, her concern evident. "Better, but not great. I made an appointment with Dr. Hannigan for tomorrow." "Good. You worry me when you're sick." "I'm never sick." "Exactly. That's why it worries me." She prepared a simple soup for me instead of the Thai food, bringing it to the bedroom on a tray with crackers and ginger ale. The domesticity of the gesture touched me. Simone was not typically nurturing, preferring to hire professionals for any task that required care or attention. Her willingness to play nurse suggested a depth of concern that I found genuinely moving. "Thank you," I said, for taking care of me. "That's what wives do." She smiled, but something in her expression flickered, a shadow that passed too quickly for me to identify. "Now eat. You need your strength." I ate the soup, which tasted fine, and fell asleep again shortly after. The dreams returned, more vivid this time. Simone standing at the edge of a pier, watching me struggle in dark water, making no move to help. I woke gasping, convinced for a terrible moment that I was actually drowning. The room was dark, Simone's side of the bed empty. I checked the time, 3:47 a.m., and heard her voice drifting from somewhere downstairs, speaking in low tones that suggested a phone call she didn't want me to over. I told myself she was probably dealing with gallery business, some crisis with the upcoming showing that required middle-of-the-night coordination. It was the reasonable explanation, the obvious one, but something had shifted in my perception, some instinct awakened by illness or dream or both. I lay in the darkness, listening to my wife's muffled voice, and felt for the first time a creeping unease that had nothing to do with physical. Something was wrong. Not just with my body, but with something larger, something I couldn't yet name but could feel pressing against the edges of my consciousness, demanding recognition. The unease followed me into sleep, and into the appointment with Dr. Hannigan the next morning, and into the weeks that followed, growing stronger with each passing day, until it became impossible. Something was terribly fundamental, and my wife was at the center of. Dr. Hannigan had been my physician for 15 years, guiding me through the minor health concerns that accumulated with age: elevated cholesterol, occasional back pain, the predictable consequences of a sedentary executive lifestyle. He was thorough, but not alarmist. The kind of doctor who inspired confidence through competence rather than bedside manner. His expression during my examination was troubling. "How long have you been experiencing these symptoms?" he asked, shining a light into my eyes while I tracked his finger. "A few days, maybe a week." "And the severity?" "It varies. Some days are better than others, but I've been having episodes: dizziness, nausea, weakness. I had to leave a board meeting yesterday because I couldn't focus." "Any changes to your diet? Medications? Supplements?" "Nothing I can think of. Simone's been trying some new recipes, but nothing exotic." Dr. Hannigan made a note, his pen moving with the deliberate strokes of someone processing information he didn't like. "I want to run some blood tests. Comprehensive panel. We'll check everything. You're concerned. I'm thorough. Your symptoms could indicate any number of things, most of them benign. But given your position and stress level, I want to be certain we're not missing any." The blood draw was routine, the wait for results less so. Dr. Hannigan had promised to call within 48 hours, but the call came in 24. Never a good sign when medical results arrive ahead of schedule. "Weston, I need you to come back to the office. Today, if possible." "What did you find?" "I'd rather discuss this in person." The drive to his office felt longer than it should have, my hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. I had faced hostile takeovers, SEC investigations, and the collapse of major investments with more composure than I was managing now. Something about Dr. Hannigan's tone had triggered an alarm that wouldn't quiet. His office was unchanged from the previous day, the same diplomas on the walls, the same anatomical models on the shelves, but the atmosphere felt different, charged with an unspoken gravity that made the air itself seem heavier. "Sit down, Weston." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, then took his own seat with the careful movements of someone preparing to deliver news they would rather not share. "Just tell me. Your blood tests showed elevated levels of several concerning substances. Heavy metals, specifically. Lead and arsenic, both significantly above normal ranges." The words landed without immediate impact, as if he were speaking a language I understood intellectually, but couldn't process emotionally. "Heavy metals? How is that possible?" "That's what I need to determine. Have you been exposed to any industrial materials? Old paint, contaminated water, certain herbal supplements?" "No. Nothing I can think of. The levels are consistent with ongoing exposure rather than a single incident, whatever the source. You've been ingesting these substances repeatedly over a period of time." "How much time?" "Based on the concentration, I would estimate several weeks, possibly longer." "Several weeks." The timeline aligned perfectly with the onset of my symptom. The dizziness that I had blamed on exhaustion, the nausea I had attributed to food poisoning, the weakness that had been steadily worsening. What does this mean for my health? "With intervention, the prognosis is good. We'll start chelation therapy to remove the metals from your system. But I have to be direct with you, Weston. These levels are not accidental. They're consistent with deliberate poisoning." The word hung in the air between us, its implications too vast to absorb. "Poisoning," I repeat, testing the word as if pronunciation might reveal its meaning. "I'm obligated to report this to the authorities. Heavy metal poisoning of this nature is a serious crime, and the pattern suggests intent rather than accident." "You think someone is deliberately poisoning me?" "I think the evidence points in that direction, yes. The question is who and how. Have you noticed anything unusual in your drinks? Any supplements you take regularly?" My mind raced through possibilities, cataloging everything I consumed, everyone who had access to my food and beverages. The coffee Simone prepared each morning, the soup she had made during my first bout of illness, the meals she had been insisting on preparing herself, claiming she wanted to take better care of me. The thought was monstrous, impossible. Simone was my wife. She had no reason to harm me. She loved me, had built a life with, had every privilege that marriage to a wealthy man could provide. But even as I rejected the idea, something shifted in my understanding. The late-night phone call, the way she had been hovering over my food prep, the almost eager way she had suggested I stay home from isolating myself from colleagues. Noticed something. "Weston?" Dr. Hannigan was watching me with the trained perception of someone accustomed to reading patients' faces. Do you have reason to suspect someone specific? No, I said, the lie forming automatically. I can't imagine who would want to hurt me. Think carefully. In my experience, this type of poisoning is almost always perpetrated by someone close to the victim, a family member, a business partner, someone with regular access to your food and daily routine. I understand. I'll think about it. But I was already thinking, not about who might be responsible, but about what I was going to do with the knowledge that was crystallizing in my mind. If Simone was poisoning me, and the evidence was beginning to seem inescapable, then I needed to proceed with extreme caution. Confronting her directly would accomplish nothing and might accelerate whatever plan she was executing. Involving the police would create a spectacle that could damage my company's reputation and alert Simone to my suspicions before I had gathered enough evidence. No, I needed a different approach. Something careful, methodical, calibrated to reveal the truth while protecting myself from further harm. I'll start the chelation therapy immediately, I told Dr. Hannigan, and I'll be more careful about what I consume. I strongly recommend involving law enforcement. This is a serious matter. Let me investigate first. If my suspicions prove unfounded, I don't want to create a scandal over nothing, and if your suspicions prove correct, then I'll involve whoever needs to be involved, but I want to know the truth before I act on it. Dr. Hannigan's expression suggested he disagreed with my approach, but he didn't press further. He scheduled my first chelation treatment for the following day and provided instructions for minimizing further exposure, advice that felt surreal, given that the primary source of exposure was likely my own wife. I drove home in a state of suspended disbelief, watching familiar streets pass as if seeing them for the first time. The life I had known, the marriage I had believed in, the home I had built, the future I had planned, all of it was crumbling under the weight of a revelation I still couldn't fully accept. Simone was waiting when I arrived, her smile as warm as ever, her concern apparently genuine. How did it go? What did the doctor say? Just some dietary issues, I lied, watching her face for any reaction. He wants me to adjust what I'm eating. That's a relief. I was worried it might be something serious. Nothing serious. Just need to be more careful. She embraced me, and I held her, feeling the familiar contours of her body against mine, while my mind processed the possibility that this woman I had loved, had trusted, had given everything, was slowly killing me. The embrace lasted longer than usual, Simone seeming reluctant to let go. When she finally released me, her eyes were bright with something I might once have interpreted as love. Now, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I hired a private investigator the next day, a former FBI agent named Howard Stillman, who had been recommended by a colleague for his discretion and thoroughness. We met at a coffee shop far from my usual haunts, the kind of anonymous establishment where a wealthy CEO could blend into the background without attracting attention. Stillman was in his late 50s, with the weathered face and economical movements of someone who had spent decades observing human behavior. He listened to my account without interruption, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You want me to investigate your wife," he said when I finished, "for attempted murder. I want you to find the truth. If she's innocent, I'll be relieved. If she's not, you need evidence that will hold up in court. I need to know what's happening. The legal implications can come later." Fair enough. He pulled out a small notebook, the gesture seeming almost quaint in the digital age. "Tell me about your wife. How did you meet? What was her background before you married?" I recounted the story I had told countless times, the charity gala, the instant connection, the whirlwind courtship that had surprised everyone who knew me. Simone had been working in marketing for a non-profit organization, her salary modest, but her ambitions evident. She had spoken of wanting to make a difference in the world, of using her talents for something meaningful. What about family, financial history? Her parents passed away when she was young. She was raised by an aunt in Portland, studied art history in college. No significant debts, no criminal record. I did a basic background check before we married. Smart. What did it reveal? Nothing concerning. She had a previous engagement that ended badly, but that's not unusual. Some credit card debt from her 20s, all paid off. A few jobs that hadn't worked out. Nothing that suggested anything problematic. Wealthy men attract certain types of people, Stillman observed, his tone neutral. Some are genuine, some are calculated. The calculated ones are usually very good at appearing genuine. I'm aware of that. I've always been careful. And yet here we are. The observation stung because it was accurate. Despite my caution, despite my experience in assessing people and motives, I had apparently married someone capable of slowly poisoning me for financial gain. "What's your estate situation?" Stillman asked. "What happens to your assets if you die?" "My will leaves the majority to Simone, with significant portions to charity and a trust for my sister's children. Simone would receive the house, the investment portfolio, roughly 70% of everything." "How much are we talking about?" "Depending on market conditions, Somewhere between $300 and $400 million. Stillman's eyebrows rose slightly. The first visible reaction he had shown. That's a considerable motive. It is. But we also signed a prenuptial agreement. In case of divorce, Simone receives a settlement of $10 million, plus the gallery and its inventory. $10 million is substantial, but it's not $400 million. If she's done the math, and someone planning what you're describing would certainly have done the math, she knows that your death is worth 40 times more than your divorce. The calculation was brutal in its simplicity. I had always prided myself on my analytical mind, my ability to assess risks and rewards with clear-eyed precision, but I had never applied that analysis to my own marriage, had never considered that Simone might be conducting her own cost-benefit evaluation with my life as the variable. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Access, financial records, phone records, anything that tracks her movements and communications. I'll also need to place surveillance on her. Nothing illegal, but comprehensive. We need to know who she's talking to, where she's going, what she's doing when you're not watching. Whatever you need. And you need to stay alive. The chelation therapy will help, but you should also change your patterns. Stop eating anything she prepares. Stop drinking anything she hands you. Find excuses that don't raise suspicion. I've already started. I've been claiming digestive issues from the doctor's new diet. She's been sympathetic about letting me prepare my own meals. Good. Keep it up. The longer you survive, the more desperate she'll become. Desperate people make mistakes." The meeting ended with a handshake and a retainer that Stillman had specified in cash. Another layer of discretion that I appreciated. I returned home with the strange sensation of being an actor in my performing the role of unsuspecting husband while carefully monitoring every interaction for signs of deception. Simone greeted me with her usual, and I responded with what I hoped was convincing normalcy. We ate dinner, food I had prepared myself, claiming the doctor's instructions forbade restaurant meals, and discussed her plans for the gallery showing. "It's going to be wonderful," she said, her enthusiasm seemingly genuine. "The artist is exactly what Seattle's been missing. Raw talent, fresh perspective, none of the pretension that dominates the local scene. You have a good eye for these things. I've learned from living with a master of identifying potential." She smiled, and for a moment I saw the woman I had married, intelligent, passionate, full of life. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could this woman be poisoning me? How could someone capable of such charm be simultaneously capable of such calculated violence? But charm was exactly what a calculating person would cultivate. Charm was the weapon of choice for those who preyed on trust. That night, lying beside her in the darkness, I felt the full weight of my situation. The woman sharing my bed might be trying to kill me. The life I had built might be nothing more than an elaborate trap. Everything I believed about my marriage, my judgment, my ability to understand people, all of it was suddenly suspect. I stayed awake long after Simone's breathing slowed into sleep, watching the ceiling and my next moves. I needed evidence, yes, but I also needed to understand why. What had transformed my wife into someone capable of murder? Had she always been this person hiding behind a mask I had been too infatuated to see through? Or had something changed, some desperation or opportunity that had corrupted whatever genuine feeling had once existed? The questions had no immediate answers, but they would guide my investigation. Because as much as I needed to protect myself and bring Simone to justice, I also needed to understand. Understanding was the only way I would ever make sense of the devastation that had become my life. Howard Stillman worked quickly. Within 2 weeks, he had assembled a dossier on my wife that revealed a woman I had never known existed. We met again at the same coffee shop. The manila folder he placed on the table between us, seeming to contain the weight of my entire marriage. "Your wife has a second phone. Prepaid, purchased with cash, used exclusively for communications she doesn't want traced. I was able to obtain records through certain contacts. The legality is questionable, so this probably won't be admissible, but it tells us what we need to know. Who is she calling? Primarily one number. It belongs to a man named Derek Vance. Ring any bells? None. Who is he? That's where it gets interesting." Stillman pulled a photograph from the folder. A man in his early 40s, attractive in a polished, practiced way. Derek Vance is a professional con artist. He's been investigated in 3 states for elder fraud, romance scams, and conspiracy. Never convicted, he's careful, and his targets are usually too embarrassed to testify. He operates by identifying wealthy marks, cultivating relationship, and finding ways to extract assets. And Simone is connected to him? They've been in contact for at least 3 years. The phone records go back that far, and their communication patterns suggest a close relationship. Daily calls, lengthy conversations, coordinated schedule. 3 years. We had been married for 4. The implication was clear. Simone had been in contact with this man for most of our marriage, possibly before it began. What's the nature of their relationship? That's still under investigation. But I did find something else. Another photograph emerged. Simone and Derek Vance at what appeared to be a restaurant, sitting close together, her hand on his arm in a gesture that suggested more than casual acquaintance. When was this taken? 6 months ago. One of my contacts managed to pull it from social media. A friend of Vance's posted it, not realizing who the woman was. It's been deleted since, but nothing really disappears from the internet. I studied the photograph, watching my wife laugh at something the man beside her had said, her body language radiating an intimacy that I had believed was reserved for. So she's having an affair. At minimum, the affair might be the point. Vance specializes in manipulating women into doing things they wouldn't otherwise do. But it's also possible that Simone is a willing participant, that she and Vance planned this together from the beginning. Planned what? You, Mr. Calloway. Your marriage, your assets, your eventual death. If I had to guess, I'd say Simone was placed in your orbit deliberately, that the chance meeting at that gala was anything but chance. The theory was paranoid, almost absurdly so, the stuff of thriller novels rather than real life. But the evidence supported it. The timing of Simone's appearance in my life, the speed with which she had cultivated my interest, the way she had positioned herself as exactly what I was looking for in a partner. There's more, Stillman continued. I had a forensic chemist analyze samples from your home, hair from your brush, residue from coffee cups, traces from various surfaces. The arsenic contamination is extensive. It's in your coffee maker, in several glasses that appear to have been exclusively used for your beverage, even in your toothpaste. She's been poisoning me systematically for weeks, possibly months. The dosages have been calculated, enough to cause symptoms but not enough to kill quickly. She's been slowly building up the toxicity in your system, making your eventual death look like organ failure rather than poisoning. Why? If she wanted me dead, why not just do it quickly? Because sudden death invites investigation. A healthy man dying overnight raises questions, but a man who has been slowly declining, who has documented medical issues, who has been seen by doctors for months with unexplained symptoms, that man's death is sad, but not suspicious. The logic was chilling in its completeness. Simone had been playing a long game, preparing for a death that would look natural to anyone who examined it superficially. If Dr. Hannigan hadn't been thorough, if he hadn't ordered the comprehensive blood panel, if I hadn't happened to schedule an appointment at exactly the right time, I would have continued to decline until the cumulative damage became fatal. What do you recommend? I asked. We have 2 options. We can take what we have to the police and let them build a case. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. A good prosecutor might be able to convince a jury. And the second option? We continue gathering evidence until we have something irrefutable. Phone records, photographs, and contamination analysis are suggestive, but they're not proof of murder. If we can catch Simone in the act, if we can document her actually poisoning you, then the case becomes unassailable. That would mean continuing to be poisoned. It would mean appearing to be poisoned while actually protecting yourself, switching your personal items, controlling what you consume, creating opportunities for her to contaminate things you don't actually use. It's risky, but it would guarantee conviction. I considered the options, weighing the risks against the potential. Going to the police now would likely result in Simone's arrest, but it might not result in conviction. A good defense attorney could argue that someone else had contaminated my home, that Derek Vance was acting alone, that Simone was a victim rather than a perpetrator. But catching her in the act, documenting the moment she added poison to my coffee, my water, my food, that would be... How would we do it? I asked. Hidden cameras throughout the house, motion sensors, audio recording, everything feeding to a secure server that can't be tampered with. We create scenarios that encourage her to act while you're protected. And if something goes wrong? If she decides to escalate before we're ready? That's the risk. But I'll have people watching around the clock. If she moves against you in any way, we intervene immediately. The plan was dangerous, but it was also thorough. And more than anything, I wanted certainty. I wanted to see, with my own eyes, the woman I had married committing the act that would define her true nature. Do it, I said. Set everything up. Let's catch her. The installation took 3 days, conducted during hours when Simone was at the gallery, and coordinated with surgical precision. By the time the technicians finished, there wasn't a room in our home that wasn't monitored. Cameras hidden in smoke detectors, audio sensors embedded in electrical outlets, motion detectors that tracked movement throughout the property. I watched the feeds from my office, reviewing hours of footage that showed nothing incriminating. Simone moving through the house, preparing meals, conducting phone calls that the audio sensors captured with perfect clarity. The calls to Derek Vance were particularly revealing. He's still taking the bait, she said, during one conversation, her voice carrying none of the warmth she displayed in my presence. The doctor put him on a special diet, so I've had to adjust the delivery method. But he's still ingesting enough to keep the levels elevated. How much longer? Vance's voice was businesslike, devoid of the romantic attachment I had assumed their relationship. A few more months. I want it to look natural, A gradual decline that surprises no one. If he dies too quickly, there will be questions. You're being too careful. Every day he's alive is a day something could go wrong. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. By summer, he'll be dead, and no one will suspect anything except that I'm a grieving widow. The casual discussion of my murder was surreal to witness. I sat in my office, headphones on, listening to my wife plan my death with the same tone she might use to discuss redecorating the living room. "What about the prenup?" Vance asked. "Won't matter. The prenup governs divorce. It says nothing about inheritance. Once he's dead, I get everything. The house, the investments, the company shares, 300 million, minimum. And then we disappear. New identities, somewhere warm. I'm thinking Costa Rica, they don't extradite." The plan was comprehensive, revealing a level of premeditation that eliminated any possibility of misinterpretation. This wasn't a desperate woman driven to extreme measures by circumstances. This was a calculated scheme that had been years in the making. I shared the recordings with Howard Stillman, who confirmed what I had suspected. We now had enough evidence to ensure conviction. "This is damning," he said. "The explicit discussion of poisoning, the financial motive, the escape plan. Any jury in the country would convict based on this. So we go to the police. We could, but there's one more thing I'd like to document. The actual act of poisoning. Right now, we have her discussing it. If we can catch her doing it, the defense has nothing to work with. How do we arrange that? You give her an opportunity, something obvious enough that she can't resist. A moment when she thinks you're completely vulnerable, when adding poison would be risk-free. We devised a scenario. I would tell Simone that I was taking a new medication that required me to drink a specific amount of water each day. Water that I kept in a designated pitcher in the refrigerator. The pitcher would be easily accessible, clearly labeled, and apparently unmonitored. In reality, cameras would be focused on that pitcher around the clock, and I would never actually drink from it. Any water I consumed would come from sealed bottles I kept locked in my office. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for Simone to take the bait. The waiting was excruciating. I went about my daily routines, maintaining the fiction of normalcy while watching my wife for any sign that she suspected the surveillance. She showed none. Her behavior remained consistent, her concern for my health seemingly genuine, her patience apparently. But the recordings continued to reveal the truth beneath the performance. "He's getting weaker," she reported to Derek Vance during one of their calls. "The doctor is running more tests, but they're not finding anything specific. The arsenic is working exactly as planned." "Good. Keep the pressure steady. Another month or two and we're home free." "I've been adding it to his vitamin supplements. He takes them every morning without question. Just swallows whatever I put in front of him. It's almost too easy." I had stopped taking the supplements weeks ago, substituting them with identical-looking pills I had obtained from a compounding pharmacy. Whatever Simone was adding to my vitamins was going into a container I kept for evidence rather than into my body. The chelation therapy was working. My blood levels were returning to normal, my symptoms gradually receding. But I maintained the appearance of decline, moving more slowly, complaining of fatigue, creating the impression that her poison was achieving its intended effect. "I'm worried about you," Simone said one evening, her voice carrying what sounded like genuine concern. "You seem to be getting worse, not better. The doctors are still running tests. They think it might be chronic fatigue syndrome, something that will resolve on its own eventually. Maybe you should see a specialist." I could research options. "I'm fine, just tired. The stress of the company has been significant. You should consider stepping back. Let your executives handle things while you focus on your health." The suggestion was transparent in its intent. Remove me from the professional environment where colleagues might notice something wrong. Isolate me further, so that my decline could proceed without interference. "I'll think about it," I said. 3 days later, she made her move. I had left the water pitcher in the refrigerator as planned, mentioning to Simone that I had been instructed to drink at least 8 glasses per day from that specific container. She had nodded sympathetically, asked if there was anything else she could do to help, and waited. The surveillance cameras captured everything. At 2:37 a.m., Simone crept downstairs to the kitchen, her movements furtive in a way that immediately signaled intent. She opened the refrigerator, removed the water pitcher, and produced a small vial from her robe pocket. The camera's resolution was excellent, good enough to capture the white powder she poured into the water, the care she took to mix it thoroughly, the satisfaction in her expression as she returned the pitcher to its shelf. She didn't know the cameras were there. She didn't know that every second of her actions was being recorded in high definition, time-stamped and verified for authenticity. She thought she was invisible, unobserved, perfectly safe in her secret crime. She was wrong. I watched the recording the next morning, feeling nothing but a cold, crystalline clarity. The woman I had married, the woman who shared my bed, had just attempted to murder me. The evidence was irrefutable, captured from multiple angles, documented with the precision of a scientific study. Howard Stillman reviewed the footage with the same professional detachment he brought to all his work. "That's it," he said. "That's the moment. Combined with everything else, the phone calls, the previous contamination analysis, the relationship with Vance, this is an airtight case. Then it's time to involve the police. I have contacts in the King County Prosecutor's Office, people who can handle this with the discretion it requires, who understand that you're the victim and that your reputation needs protecting. Do it. I want her arrested before she has any idea what's coming." The call was made, the evidence transmitted, and by the following morning, Detective Sandra Holt of the Seattle Police Department was sitting in my office, reviewing the documentation that would end my marriage and send my wife to prison. "This is one of the most comprehensive cases of domestic poisoning I've ever seen," she said, paging through the file. "You've done our job for us, Mr. Calloway. I had to know. I had to see it for myself before I could believe. The charges will be substantial: attempted murder, conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon. If we can tie Derek Vance into the planning, we're looking at additional counts. What happens now? Now we arrest her. Do you want to be present? Or would you prefer to be elsewhere when it happens? I want to see her face when she realizes it's over." The detective nodded, understanding something that she didn't need to articulate. After everything Simone had done, I deserved to witness the moment her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. We set the arrest for the following evening, timing it for when Simone would be home. I spent the intervening hours in a state of suspended anticipation, watching my wife perform her routine with the knowledge that she was enjoying her last hours of freedom. She had no idea what was coming, just as I had no idea, all those months ago, that the woman pouring my coffee was slowly poisoning me. Tomorrow the truth would finally emerge, and nothing would ever be the same again. The arrest happened at 7:15 p.m. on a Thursday, time to coincide with our usual dinner hour. I had told Simone I would be home late, creating an excuse for my absence when the police arrived. But in reality I was watching from a surveillance van parked 3 houses away. The unmarked cars appeared without warning, 6 officers emerging with the practiced coordination of a tactical unit. They surrounded the house, covered all exits, and then Detective Holt approached the front door with a warrant in. The knock echoed through the surveillance feed, followed by footsteps as Simone answered. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm Detective Sandra Holt with the Seattle Police Department. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and assault with a deadly weapon. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The transformation on Simone's face was fascinating to observe. Confusion gave way to comprehension, comprehension to panic, panic to a cold calculation that revealed the person she truly was beneath the mask she had worn for years. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I haven't done anything." "Ma'am, please turn around. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. This is absurd. My husband will clear this up. Your husband is the one who provided the evidence against you." The words landed with visible impact. Simone's composure cracked just for a moment, revealing something raw and ugly beneath, a fury that confirmed everything the evidence had suggested. "He can't prove anything. He doesn't know. Mrs. Calloway, I'm going to advise you to stop talking. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed." The handcuffs closed around her wrists, and I watched as my wife was led from the home we had shared, her head held high despite the circumstances, her expression settling into something that resembled defiance rather than remorse. Derek Vance was arrested 3 hours later at a hotel in downtown Seattle, apparently waiting for a call from Simone that never come. The charges against him were extensive: conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to attempted murder, multiple counts of wire fraud from previous schemes. The prosecution had everything they needed. I returned home that night to a house that felt profoundly different from the one I had left that morning. The surveillance equipment had been removed, the evidence collected, the space returned to its original configuration. But the room still echoed with the presence of the woman who had tried to kill me, her touch lingering on surfaces I would eventually replace, her influence persisting in choices I would eventually. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the living room, watching the lights of distant boats crossing Lake Washington, and tried to process what my life had become. I was alive. That was the primary fact, the foundation upon which everything else would. Against all odds, despite months of systematic poisoning, I had survived. But survival was not the same as wholeness. The woman I had loved had tried to murder me for money. The marriage I had believed in had been a performance from its first moment. The judgment I had always trusted had failed me when it mattered most. How do you rebuild after something like that? How do you trust again? Open yourself again? Believe in anything again when the person closest to you turned out to be a predator wearing the mask of a partner? I didn't have answers that night. I had only questions. Endless questions, and the bitter knowledge that some of them might never be resolved. But I was alive, and while I lived, There was the possibility of answers, the hope of healing, the chance to become someone wiser than been so thoroughly deceived. Tomorrow, the legal process would begin. There would be arraignments, and bail hearings, and pre-trial motions. The machinery of justice grinding forward toward a conclusion that was not yet certain. Simone would fight the charges, of course she would, and her attorneys would look for any weakness in the case against her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the forensic analysis, the testimony of experts who would explain exactly how she had tried to kill me, and exactly why that attempt had failed. Justice was coming, and I intended to be there for every moment of it. The trial began 6 months after Simone's arrest, delayed by legal maneuvering from a defense team that had tried every possible strategy to suppress evidence, change venue, or delay proceedings. None of it worked. The evidence was legally obtained, the jurisdiction was appropriate, and the prosecution was ready. On a cold October morning, I sat in the gallery of the King County Superior Court and watched as the woman who had tried to murder me was brought before the bar of justice. She looked different in the defense table attire, a conservative suit replacing the designer clothes she had favored, her makeup subtle rather than striking, her demeanor projecting the humility of a woman wrongfully accused rather than the arrogance of a predator caught in the act. Her attorneys had clearly coached her on presentation. The prosecution would need to overcome the impression she was cultivating, the confused wife, the devoted partner, the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of attempted murder. Prosecutor Ellen Graves began with an opening statement that laid out the case with devastating clarity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are going to see something in this courtroom that most people only encounter in fiction, a premeditated, systematic attempt by a wife to murder her husband for money. The evidence will show that Simone Calloway, working with her co-conspirator Derek Vance, spent years planning and executing a scheme to poison Weston Calloway, collect his fortune, and disappear to avoid prosecution. You will see video evidence of Mrs. Calloway adding arsenic to her husband's water supply. You will hear recordings of conversations between Mrs. Calloway and Mr. Vance in which they discuss the poisoning in explicit detail, including their plans for spending the money after Mr. Calloway's death. You will hear testimony from medical experts who will explain exactly how the poisoning was carried out, and exactly what the consequences would if it had not been detected. The evidence in this case is not circumstantial. It is not subject to interpretation. It is documented fact, captured on video and audio, corroborated by forensic analysis and expert testimony. By the end of this trial, you will have no doubt, no reasonable doubt, no any doubt, that Simone Calloway attempted to murder her husband for his money. The defense responded with a narrative I had anticipated, but still found breathtaking in its audacity. Ladies and gentlemen, Simone Calloway is not a murderer. She is a victim of an abusive marriage, a controlling husband, and a system that has always favored the wealthy and powerful over those they exploit. The prosecution will show you videos and play you recordings, but what they won't tell you is how those videos were obtained through illegal surveillance conducted without warrant or consent. What they won't tell you is that Weston Calloway had the resources to manufacture evidence, to create a narrative that served his purposes, to frame the woman he wanted to be rid of. Mr. Calloway is a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He has the means to hire private investigators, forensic experts, anyone he needs to construct a case against his wife. And when you examine the evidence closely, when you look at the inconsistencies, the convenient timing, the suspicious circumstance, you will see that this is not a case of attempted murder. This is a case of a powerful man using the legal system to destroy a woman who had the audacity to want out of a marriage that was killing her in different ways. The audacity of the defense strategy was breathtaking, accusing me of manufacturing the evidence that documented Simone's crime, transforming the victim into the perpetrator through sheer force of narrative. But the evidence was too strong for storytelling alone. The prosecution called its witnesses systematically: the forensic chemist who had analyzed the contamination in my home, the medical experts who had diagnosed my poisoning and supervised my treatment, the technicians who verified the authenticity of the surveillance footage, and then there were the recordings. The jury listened in complete silence as Simone's voice filled the courtroom, discussing the poisoning with Derek Vance in explicit detail, calculating how long it would take for me to die, planning their escape to Costa Rica with my money. He's still taking the bait. The arsenic is working exactly as planned. How much longer? By summer, he'll be dead, and no one will suspect anything except that I'm a grieving widow. The defense tried to suggest the recordings had been manipulated, but their own experts couldn't find any evidence of tampering. The authentication was complete. The chain of custody was perfect, and the voices were unquestionably those of Simone Calloway and Derek Vance. The video evidence was even more damaging. The jury watched as Simone crept to the refrigerator at 2:37 a.m., removed the water pitcher, and added powder from a vial she had concealed in. The camera captured her face clearly. Her expression, the deliberate care she took to mix the poison thoroughly. No amount of narrative could explain that away. I testified on the fourth day of the trial, recounting everything from the first symptoms through the discovery and investigation. The defense attorney cross-examined me aggressively, suggesting that I had reasons to frame my wife, that our marriage had been troubled, that I had been planning to divorce her, and wanted to avoid the prenuptial settlement. Isn't it true, Mr. Calloway, that you were planning to leave your wife before any of this supposed poisoning occurred? No. Isn't it true that you had consulted with divorce attorneys about terminating your marriage? No. Isn't it true that a divorce would have cost you $10 million under the terms of your prenuptial agreement, while framing your wife for attempted murder would cost you nothing? That characterization is both false and offensive. I had no intention of divorcing my wife until I discovered she was trying to kill me. And we have only your word for that, don't we? You have my word. The testimony of my physician who discovered the poisoning independently, the forensic evidence of contamination throughout my home, and the recordings of my wife explicitly discussing her plan to murder me. If that's not enough for you, I'm not sure. The cross-examination continued, but the defense had nothing substantive to work with. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented, too thoroughly authenticated. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict: guilty, on all counts. Simone stood motionless as the verdict was read, her expression betraying nothing. But as she was led from the courtroom, she turned toward me with a look of such concentrated hatred that I felt its impact like a physical force. "This isn't over," she said, the words carrying across the silent gallery. "You think you've won, but you haven't. The bailiff silenced, escorting her through the doors and toward the holding cells where she would await sentence. But I had heard what she said, had seen the promise of continued malice in her. The legal case might be over, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. The sentencing hearing took place 8 weeks after the verdict, time the court had allowed for pre-sentencing reports and victim impact statements. I had spent those weeks in a peculiar limbo, vindicated by the conviction, yet still processing the enormity of what had happened. The courtroom was packed for sentencing, the case having attracted media attention that made privacy impossible. I had become, against my will, a public figure, the wealthy CEO whose wife had tried to poison him, a cautionary tale that the media couldn't resist. Simone appeared in the orange jumpsuit of the county jail, her transformation from elegant socialite to convicted criminal now complete. She had lost weight during the months of incarceration, her cheekbones more prominent, her eyes carrying a hardness that had been concealed during better days. Judge Catherine Thornton presided, her reputation for firm but fair sentencing preceding her. She had been assigned the case randomly, but her background, former prosecutor, advocate for victims' rights, suggested the outcome would not favor the defense. The prosecution presented its sentencing recommendations first: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The attempt had been premeditated, the planning extensive, the victim particularly vulnerable given his trust in the perpetrator. Your Honor, the defendant didn't just try to kill her husband. She methodically poisoned him over a period of months, calculating dosages to ensure his death would appear natural, coordinating with a co-conspirator to plan their escape after his murder. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. This was a carefully orchestrated scheme to commit murder for financial gain. The maximum sentence is the only appropriate response. The defense argued for leniency, presenting a narrative of mental health struggles and emotional abuse that had supposedly driven Simone to extreme measures. Your Honor, Simone Calloway is not a monster. She is a woman who made terrible choices under circumstances that would break anyone. The marriage to Mr. Calloway was not the partnership he has presented. It was a relationship marked by control, emotional manipulation, and the gradual erosion of Mrs. Calloway's sense of self. While her actions were inexcusable, they were also understandable in the context of what she endured. The judge listened to both arguments without visible reaction, her expression maintaining the neutrality that decades on the bench had perfected. Then she invited me to present my victim impact statement. I had written and rewritten the statement countless times, struggling to find words that captured the complexity of what I had experienced. In the end, I spoke simply, letting the facts carry their own weight. Your Honor, I married Simone Calloway because I loved her. I believed she loved me in return. I built a life around that belief, a home, a future, a partnership I expected to last until death. In a way, I got what I expected. The partnership did end with death, or it would have if the poisoning hadn't been detected. My wife didn't just try to kill my body. She killed my ability to trust, my confidence in my own judgment, my belief in the possibility of genuine connection. The physical effects of the poisoning were significant: organ damage that required months of treatment, lingering effects that may persist for years. But the psychological damage was worse. I lay beside this woman every night, shared meals with her, made plans for our future together, all while she was systematically adding arsenic to my food and water, calculating how long it would take me to die. How do you recover from that? How do you ever trust again, open yourself again, believe in anyone's sincerity again? I don't have answers to those questions. I may never have answers. What I do know is that Simone Calloway is dangerous. She spent years planning my murder, cultivated relationships to facilitate it, and showed no remorse when her plan was discovered. She does not belong in society. She belongs exactly where the prosecution has recommended, behind bars, for the rest of her life, unable to harm anyone else the way she tried to harm. Judge Thornton thanked me for my statement, and then addressed Simone directly. Mrs. Calloway, do you have anything to say before I pronounce sentence? Simone stood, her posture defiant despite her circumstance. I do, Your Honor. I want it on record that I am innocent of these charges. The evidence was manufactured by a man who had the resources to create whatever narrative he wanted. The system has failed me, just as it fails countless women who dare to challenge powerful men. I accept whatever sentence this court imposes, not because I deserve it, but because I understand that justice in America is a commodity available only to those who can afford to buy it. My husband bought my conviction. He will live with that knowledge for the rest of his life, just as I will live with the consequences. The statement was consistent with everything Simone had maintained throughout the trial: complete denial, transferred blame, victimhood in the face of overwhelming evidence. She had not wavered, had not acknowledged wrongdoing, had shown not a moment of genuine remorse. Judge Thornton's response was measured but devastating. Mrs. Calloway, I have presided over many difficult cases in my years on the bench, but yours stands out for the degree of premeditation, the callousness of execution, and the complete absence of remorse. You planned to murder your husband, a man who trusted you, who shared his life with you, who had no idea the woman he loved was systematically poisoning him. The evidence in this case was not manufactured. It was documented through legal means, authenticated by experts, and corroborated by testimony from multiple witnesses. Your denial, while your prerogative, does nothing to mitigate the severity of your crime. The court hereby sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the crime of attempted murder in the first degree. Additional concurrent sentences are imposed for conspiracy and assault charges. You will be remanded to the custody of the Washington State Department of Corrections to serve this sentence immediately. The gavel fell, and it was over. Simone was led from the courtroom, and I felt the peculiar emptiness that follows the resolution of a crisis. The woman who had tried to kill me would spend the rest of her life in prison. Justice had been served, as completely as justice ever can be, but the closure I had hoped for didn't materialize. Instead, I felt only the weight of everything that had happened: the betrayal, the violation, the destruction of a life I had believed in. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. My attorney guided me to a waiting car, and I was driven away from the spectacle, toward a future I couldn't yet imagine. The months following the sentencing blurred together in a haze of recovery and reconstruction. I sold the Bellevue house. Couldn't bear to live there, surrounded by memories that had become poisonous in ways beyond the literal, and purchased a penthouse in downtown Seattle that had no history, no associations, no echoes of the life I had shared with Simone. The physical recovery was straightforward, if slow. The chelation therapy had removed most of the heavy metals from my system, but some organ damage persisted: liver function that remained slightly impaired, kidney values that required monitoring. My doctors assured me that the long-term prognosis was good, that with care and attention, I would live a normal lifespan. But normal felt like a concept that no longer applied to my life. I continued working, throwing myself into the company with an intensity that concerned my colleagues. The acquisition I had been negotiating when the poisoning was discovered had gone through, and Callaway Energy Solutions was now the dominant player in Pacific Northwest renewable energy. The success felt hollow, but it provided structure, something to do, somewhere to be, a reason to get out of bed each morning. My sister, Ellen, flew in from Boston and stayed for 2 weeks, providing the kind of support that only family can offer. You need to talk to someone, she said over dinner one evening. A professional. What you've been through. It's not something you can just work through on your own. I know. I've been seeing a therapist. And it helps. Sometimes. Other times, I'm not sure anything helps. You're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to be damaged. What matters is that you keep moving forward. I'm trying. I know you are. I just worry about you, alone in this city, processing all of this without anyone to share it with. Her concern was genuine, and I appreciated it, even when I couldn't fully accept it. The isolation she worried about was partly deliberate, a protective barrier I had constructed to prevent anyone from getting close enough to hurt me. The therapy was helping, slowly. Dr. Richard Chen specialized in trauma recovery, and our sessions explored not just the immediate crisis, but the patterns that had led me to it. "You're someone who trusts his own judgment," he observed during one session. "Your career, your success, they've been built on making good decisions, assessing situations accurately, understanding people and their motivations. And yet I married someone who was planning to murder me, which means your trust in your own judgment has been shattered. The question is whether you rebuild that trust, or let the failure define you. How do I rebuild trust when the evidence suggests I can't be trusted? By recognizing that being deceived by a skilled manipulator doesn't mean your judgment is fundamentally flawed. It means you encountered someone who had a career of deception, someone who had years of practicing false impressions. You weren't fooled, were fooled because she was good at what she did. The reframing helped, but it didn't eliminate the doubt that had taken root in my psyche. Every relationship now felt suspect, every warmth potentially calculated, every kindness possibly prelude to betrayal. I kept Simone's belongings in storage, unable to decide what to do with them. The gallery she had run was sold, its inventory auctioned to cover debts that had accumulated during her incarceration. The life she had built, the persona she had created, was being dismantled piece by piece, leaving nothing but the truth of who she actually was. Derek Vance had pleaded guilty to conspiracy charge and been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His testimony at Simone's trial had been damaging, not to her since he maintained their mutual culpability, but to any sympathy the jury might have felt. He had revealed their partnership in clinical detail, apparently calculating that cooperation might reduce his own sentence. It hadn't worked, but his testimony had provided insight into how the scheme had been constructed. "She approached me," he had testified, said she had identified a Mark, a wealthy man who was lonely, who was looking for connection, who would be easy to manipulate. She wanted help with the long game, establishing the relationship, building trust, positioning herself for the payoff. And the payoff was always murder? Not always. Sometimes the marks could be bled dry through divorce or financial manipulation. But Calloway's prenup limited what she could get through divorce. Murder was the only way to access the full fortune. "So you planned his death from the beginning?" "We planned options. Murder was the option that maximized return." It became the preferred option when Simone realized how completely Calloway trusted her, how easy it would be to poison him without detection. The cold calculation revealed by Vance's testimony haunted me more than any other aspect of the case. I had been assessed, evaluated, and targeted as systematically as any business acquisition. My vulnerability had been identified and exploited by professionals who had done this before and would have done it again. I was lucky to be alive. The realization repeated itself daily, sometimes hourly, a mantra that was both comforting and disturbing. Lucky, as if survival against attempted murder was a matter of fortune rather than contingency. A year after Simone's conviction, I began to feel something that approximated normalcy returning to my life. The therapy was working, the physical symptoms had largely resolved, and the constant hypervigilance that had characterized my first months of recovery had begun to ease. I was learning to live again, if not to trust. Work remained my primary focus, but I had started exploring other dimensions of life that I had neglected during my years of single-minded professional dedication. I reconnected with old friends who had been pushed aside during my marriage, joined a sailing club that provided both recreation and community, began volunteering with organizations that supported victims of domestic violence. The volunteering was particularly meeting others who had survived abuse and betrayal helped me understand that my experience, while extreme, was not unique. The dynamics Simone had exploited, trust, isolation, gradual escalation, were familiar to anyone who worked with victims of intimate partner violence. "You were abused," one counselor told me during a training session. "It might not look like traditional domestic violence, but the pattern is the same. Control, manipulation, isolation, escalation to physical harm. The fact that she used poison instead of fists doesn't change the fundamental nature of what happened." The recognition was validating but also complicated. I had never thought of myself as an abuse victim. The term seemed to belong to others, to people whose suffering was more visible and conventional than mine. But the counselor was right. Simone had controlled my perception of reality, manipulated my emotion, isolated me from anyone who might have questioned our relationship, and ultimately escalated to physical violence in the form of systematic poisoning. The dynamics were identical to those experienced by millions of abuse victims, only the methodology was different. This understanding helped me forgive myself for not seeing what was happening sooner. Abuse victims often struggle to recognize their situation because the perpetrator has carefully constructed a reality that obscures the truth. I had been no different, trapped in a narrative Simone had created, unable to see past the performance until physical evidence made the truth undeniable. I also began to consider the possibility of future relationships. The idea had seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of the trial. The violation of trust too complete to imagine ever opening myself to someone again. But as the months passed and healing progressed, I recognized that permanent isolation was itself a form of defeat, allowing Simone's betrayal to determine the shape of my entire future. The goal isn't to forget what happened, Dr. Chen observed. The goal is to integrate it, to let the experience inform your judgment without controlling your choices. You can be careful without being closed. You can trust selectively without trusting blindly. How do I know the difference? How do I distinguish between appropriate caution and paranoid avoidance? You won't always know. That's the uncomfortable truth. But you can develop better tools for assessment, build relationships gradually, rather than rushing into commitment. Maintain the independence that allows you to recognize warning signs early. That sounds exhausting. It's more exhausting than blind trust, yes. But blind trust is what got you here. Some exhaustion is a reasonable price to pay for protection. I took his advice to heart, approaching new relationships with a deliberateness that felt foreign to my natural personality, but necessary given my history. I dated occasionally, keeping expectations low and boundaries firm, sharing only what felt safe and maintaining the independence Dr. Chen had recommended. Most of these relationships didn't progress beyond a few meetings. The chemistry wasn't there, or the compatibility was lacking, or the person revealed something that triggered my heightened threat detection. But occasionally, someone felt genuinely interesting, genuinely safe, genuinely worth knowing better. One of these people was Catherine Blackwood, a marine biologist I met through the sailing club. She was 42, divorced, direct in a way that I found refreshing after years of Simone's calculated performance. She knew about my history. It had been impossible to keep private given the media coverage, but she addressed it with characteristic forthrightness. I read about what happened to you, she said during one of our early conversations. I'm sorry you went through that. Thank you. I want you to know that I understand if you're not interested in anything serious. Given what you've experienced, I wouldn't blame you for wanting to keep things casual. I appreciate that. I'm still figuring out what I want, what I'm capable of. That's honest. I can work with honest. The relationship developed slowly, each step considered and deliberate in a way that previous relationships had never been. I found myself sharing more than I had expected, opening up about my experience in ways that felt healing rather than burdensome. Catherine listened without judgment, asking questions when clarification was needed, offering support without overwhelming attention. Her directness was a welcome contrast to the manipulation I had experienced with Simone. There were no hidden agendas, no subtle maneuvering, just straightforward communication about what she wanted and expected. You don't have to be healed to be with someone, she said several months into our relationship. You just have to be healing. Growth is enough. Perfection is not required. I'm definitely not perfect. Neither am I. But we can be imperfect together, which is probably the best any of us can hope for. The simplicity of her philosophy was exactly what I needed. Not pressure to recover fully before being worthy of love, but acceptance of the ongoing process, the understanding that healing was a journey rather than a destination. I was still on that journey. I might always be on, but at least now I wasn't traveling alone. 2 years after Simone's arrest, I stood on the deck of my sailboat, watching the sun set over the Puget Sound. Catherine was beside me, her hand in mine, the comfortable silence between us speaking more eloquently than any words could have. We had been together for 8 months, long enough to know that the relationship was long enough to have navigated challenges that tested our compatibility. The trust was still building, would probably always be built, but the foundation felt solid in ways I hadn't believed possible. Are you thinking about her, Catherine? Reading my mood with the perception that characterized her attention. A little. It's hard not to, on a day like today. That's understandable. The anniversary of something traumatic brings it back, even when you've moved past it. Have I moved past it? I think you have. You're not the same person who walked into the sailing club 15 months ago. That person was still in survival mode, still bracing for the next attack. You've relaxed since then, opened up, started living again instead of just enduring. You've helped with that. I've been part of it, but the work has been yours. I just provided companionship for the journey. The modesty was characteristic of Catherine, who deflected credit with the same efficiency she employed in her scientific. But she was underestimating her contribution, the trust she had extended, the patience she had demonstrated, the acceptance she had offered without condition. These had been essential to my recovery, creating a safe space where healing could actually occur. I spoke with my attorney yesterday, I said. Simone's appeal was denied. Final this time. No more avenues for challenge. How do you feel about that? Mostly. I knew the appeal was unlikely to succeed, but there's always uncertainty until it's truly final. Now, it's final. Do you think about visiting her? About confronting her directly? I've thought about it, but I can't imagine what purpose it would serve. She's never going to acknowledge what she did. She's committed to the narrative of her innocence, probably even believes it at this point. Confrontation would just reopen wounds that are finally starting to heal. That sounds like a healthy decision. I hope so. I've spent 2 years processing what happened, trying to understand how I could have been so thoroughly deceived, what it means about my judgment and my ability to read people. The conclusion I've reached is that some people are simply better at deception than others are at detection. I was targeted by a professional, a con artist who had perfected her craft over years of practice. My failure to see through her performance doesn't mean my judgment is fundamentally flawed. It means I was overmatched. That's a generous interpretation. It's the interpretation that allows me to move forward. I can't spend the rest of my life second-guessing every interaction, assuming everyone is a potential threat. I have to trust my judgment, even knowing it's fallible. And do you trust it now? Your judgment? More than I did a year ago, less than I did before Simone. Somewhere in between, which is probably appropriate. Catherine squeezed my hand, the gesture conveying support and understanding without the need for words. We watched the sun complete its descent, the sky cycling through oranges and purples before settling into the deep blue of approaching night. "I have something to tell you," Catherine said, her voice carrying a weight that suggested significance. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position, research lead at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. It's a tremendous opportunity, the kind of thing I've been working toward for years." "Catherine, that's wonderful. Congratulations." It would mean relocating to California, leaving Seattle. The implications settled over me like the cooling evening air. We had never discussed long-term plans, had been careful to maintain the gradual pace that my recovery required. But the relationship had deepened despite our caution, becoming something neither of us had expected or necessarily intended. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know. The opportunity is too significant to refuse without serious consideration. But leaving what we've built, that's not something I want either. When do you need to decide?" "They've given me a month." We stood in silence, the decision hanging between us like the evening mist that was beginning to gather over the water. It was exactly the kind of crossroads that tested relationships, that revealed whether connection was superficial or substantial. "I don't want you to give up this opportunity," I said finally. "It's too important, and you've worked too hard to get here." "That's not what I asked. I asked what I should do, not what you think I should consider. What you should do is follow your professional ambitions. They matter. They define you in ways that no relationship should override. And what about us? Us can adapt. Long distance is possible, at least for a while. And maybe—" I hesitated, the words carrying more weight than I had intended. "Maybe I could consider relocating eventually. Callaway Energy doesn't require me to be in Seattle. I can manage remotely, can restructure my responsibilities to allow for a different base." "You would do that? Uproot your life? Leave the company you built?" "I would consider it, for the right reasons, with the right person." Catherine turned to face me, her expression searching mine for the certainty that my words had suggested. "Is that what you're saying? That I might be the right person?" "I'm saying it's possible, that what we have might be worth restructuring other things to preserve. That you've helped me believe in the possibility of a future I didn't think I could have." The kiss that followed was different from the ones that had preceded it, deeper, more committed, carrying the weight of a decision that hadn't been made but was now possible. The journey wasn't over, the healing wasn't complete, but I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was becoming something new, someone shaped by experience but not controlled by it, someone capable of trust and love and hope despite having every reason to retreat from all three. Simone had tried to kill me, and she had failed, but her real failure was larger than the botched poisoning. It was the failure to destroy my capacity for connection, my ability to believe in others, my willingness to risk again. I had survived, and I intended to do more than survive. I intended to live. Catherine took the position in Monterey, and I began the process of restructuring my professional life to accommodate a future I hadn't anticipated, but increasingly wanted. The transition took a year, time enough to train a successor at Callaway Energy, to establish the remote management systems that would allow me to maintain involvement without physical presence, to dispose of Seattle properties, and acquire new ones in California. It was the most significant change I had made since founding the company, and it was motivated entirely by personal rather than professional considerations. The irony wasn't lost on me. A decade earlier, I had been the man who sacrificed everything for business success, who had no serious relationships because they interfered with ambition. Now, I was the man reshaping his business to accommodate a relationship. The transformation felt healthy rather than compromise, a recognition that life was more than work, that success meant different things at different stages, that the empire I had built was meaningless if I had no one to share it with. Catherine and I moved into a house in Carmel, a coastal community that offered the natural beauty we both valued and the proximity to her work that the position required. The adjustment was significant: new routines, new environment, new patterns of daily life. But the foundation we had built proved strong enough to support the changes. We married 2 years after her move to California, in a small ceremony overlooking the Pacific. My sister Ellen served as witness. Catherine's brother flew in from New Zealand. The guest list was deliberately minimal. Neither of us wanted spectacle, and my history made publicity particularly unwelcome. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Vows exchanged with the full weight of experience behind them. "I promise to trust you," I said, "even when trust feels dangerous. I promise to be honest with you, even when honesty is uncomfortable. I promise to build something real with you, something that can survive whatever challenges we face. I promise to see you," Catherine responded, "as you actually are, not as I want you to. I promise to grow with you, to let our relationship evolve rather than trying to freeze it in any perfect moment. I promise to be your partner, in struggles, in triumphs, in everything between." The vows were deliberately different from the traditional formula, crafted to reflect the particular circumstances that had brought us together. We had both experienced enough to know that promises alone meant nothing, that relationships required continuous choice, daily commitment, the ongoing decision to prioritize connection over the countless forces that could erode it. The marriage felt different at first, not just because Catherine was different from Simone, but because I was different from the man who had married Simone. I was more cautious, but also more present, more aware of what I was choosing and why I was choosing it. The company continued to thrive under the new leadership structure I had established, and I found myself with something I had never expected: time. Time to sail, to read, to explore the California coast with the woman I loved. Time to be, rather than simply do. I still followed news of Simone occasionally, unable to completely sever the connection to someone who had so thoroughly shaped my recent history. She had adapted to prison life with the same calculated efficiency she had brought to everything else, apparently maintaining the performance of wrongful conviction, even when there was no longer any audience who believed her. Her parents had eventually stopped visiting, the weight of evidence too overwhelming even for parental loyalty, and she had been transferred to a facility in eastern Washington, far from anyone who had known her. The glamorous life she had schemed for was replaced by concrete and routine. Designer clothes by prison uniforms, champagne by institutional coffee. I felt no satisfaction in her suffering. That had faded long ago, replaced by something more like exhaustion at the thought of her. She had taken years of my life, had nearly ended my life entirely, and I refused to give her any more of my emotional energy by dwelling on her fate. The future was what mattered now, and the future, against all expectations, looked remarkably bright. 5 years after Simone's conviction, I sat on the deck of the Carmel house, watching the sunset as I had on so many evenings before. Catherine was inside, preparing dinner with the casual competence that characterized her approach to most tasks. I could hear her humming something, a sign of contentment that I had learned to recognize over our years together. The peace I felt was hard-won, built on the wreckage of an experience that had nearly destroyed me, but it was real, substantial in ways that the happiness of my previous life had never been. I had learned things from my ordeal that I could have learned no other way. I had learned that trust, while risky, was essential to meaningful connection. I had learned that vulnerability, while dangerous, was the only path to genuine intimacy. I had learned that survival was not enough, that living required engagement with the world despite its potential for harm. These were not comfortable lessons. They had been purchased with pain and fear and the systematic dissolution of everything I had believed about my life, but they were true, and their truth had transformed me into someone I might not have become otherwise. The doorbell rang, an unusual occurrence in our relatively isolated location, and I heard Catherine open the door, followed by voices I didn't immediately recognize. She appeared on the deck moments later, her expression suggesting something significant. "There's someone here to see you. Says he's from the Washington State Department of Corrections." My heart rate increased automatically, the response conditioned by years of hypervigilance. "What do they want?" He didn't say, but he's carrying official documents. I went inside to meet the visitor, a middle-aged man in a uniform that identified him as a corrections officer, his expression carrying the neutral professionalism of someone delivering news that didn't personally affect him. "Mr. Calloway, I'm Officer Dennis Patterson from the Washington State Department of Corrections. I'm here to deliver official notification regarding inmate Simone Calloway." "Notification of what?" "Inmate Calloway died this morning. Medical cause. The official determination is pending autopsy, but initial indications suggest natural causes. Heart failure, possibly related to underlying conditions that weren't fully diagnosed." The words registered slowly, their implications processing through layers of emotion that I couldn't immediately identify. "She's dead?" "Yes, sir. As the victim of record, you're entitled to official notification. I'm sorry for any distress this may cause." I thanked him automatically, accepted the documents he offered, and stood in the doorway as he returned to his car and drove away. Catherine appeared beside me, her hand finding mine with the instinctive support that become automatic between us. "Are you okay?" "I don't know. I didn't expect to feel anything. She's been out of my life for years, but this is final." "Yes, Final in a way that even the conviction wasn't. She's gone now. Completely gone. We stood together in silence, the evening air cool against my skin, the reality of Simone's death settling into my consciousness. I had imagined this moment in various ways over the sometimes with satisfaction, sometimes with indifference, occasionally with a complicated grief for the woman I had believed she was before the truth emerged. But the actual feeling was none of these things. What I felt was release. Not joy or satisfaction, but the lifting of a weight I hadn't fully realized I was still carrying. The knowledge that Simone could never appeal her conviction, could never tell her side of the story to sympathetic audiences, could never contact me or Catherine or anyone in our life. That knowledge provided a peace that years of therapy and healing had not fully achieved. It was over. Truly over. I'm free, I said, the words surprising me even as I spoke them. I didn't realize until just now that I wasn't. You were always free. She was in prison, not you. I know. But some part of me was still tethered to her, still defined by what she did, still shaped by the experience of surviving her. Now even that connection is severed. Catherine nodded, understanding without requiring explanation. She had witnessed my healing, had participated, had known that some wounds required time and distance, and sometimes final resolution to fully close. That evening, we ate dinner on the deck as we had on countless evenings before, but something felt different. The future stretched before me with a clarity it hadn't possessed before. A future finally untethered from the past, finally free to become whatever I chose to make of it. I thought about the journey that had brought me, from the first symptoms of poisoning through the investigation, the trial, the conviction, the years of recovery. It had been the hardest experience of my life, but it had also been transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I was stronger now, more present, more capable of genuine connection, despite having every reason to retreat from connection entirely. The woman I had married had tried to kill me for money. He had failed, and I had built something beautiful from the wreckage of her attempt. As Catherine and I watched the last light fade from the sky, I felt something I had been working toward for 5 years, but had never quite achieved: peace. Not the fragile peace of denial or avoidance, but the solid peace of integration, the recognition that my experience had shaped me without defining me, that the past informed my present without controlling my future. I was exactly where I wanted to be, with exactly the person I wanted to be with. The journey had been brutal, but the destination made every step worthwhile. The bitter taste of Simone's betrayal had finally faded. What remained was something sweeter: a life rebuilt, a trust restored, a future earned through survival and healing, and the daily choice to live rather than merely exist. I had been dealt a terrible hand, and I had played it the best way I knew. In the end, that was all any of us could do.